Good afternoon, my name is Dave Norton from Discovering New England History, and we're going to bring you part 3, the stories of my great uncles, the Norton brothers. They were both brothers, and how they served in World War I. So we'll go to the first slide. And we're going to recap a little bit. Now we're going to switch over to Norman Norton. He came over to France quite a bit later, over 6 months later than his brother, because he was a draftee and his brother enlisted. But we're going to recap how we got over there first. And a lot of this was covered in episode 1. There's Norman Norton, and he went to Fort Devens, Massachusetts. That's where all the draftees went from New England. And that's an incredible picture there. That's in Plainville, Connecticut. And that's taken at the train station when all the recruits got on there to go to Fort Devens. That's a part of history here found in our, from my relatives. We'll go to the next slide. Now, when he was there, and there's this picture on the right, actually I circled it in red, very extensive training, and it was the 76th Infantry Division. And they were all made out of recruits, draftees, if you will. And because he had a high aptitude, he was immediately put into the trench mortar battalion. And you can see that over on the left. That's one of the many different designs of the trench mortars. We'll go to the next slide. Now, at that time, the United States was, training across the country, sending troops over to France. They kept on training and sending troops over, and there was a troop ship over here called the SS Tuscania. And it got across the Atlantic Ocean all the way as far as Ireland, and it got torpedoed by a German U-boat. And it had 2,200 soldiers from the 41st Infantry Division. And almost 300 were actually killed February 1918. And that's the 41st Infantry Division. There's what the newspapers printed back in the day. U.S. troop ships torpedoed in the war zone, 267 men missing. And a lot were saved. It took a while to go down, 4 hours before it was completely submerged. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because Norman Norton, at some point when he was over in France, he was transferred to the 41st Infantry Division. And I have the original patch right here, which I picked up. It's what they wore, the 41st Infantry. That's a nice looking patch. And this was his, of course, the first one that at Fort Devens or whatever. That's the 76th patch. Very famous in World War I. So we'll go to the next slide. Now, once again, they landed in Le Havre, France, July 1918, 76th Infantry Division. And there are the troops just getting off their troop ship. And there's Private Norman Norton. We'll go to the next slide. Now, this is different. They went to a different training site because Private Norton, he was they discovered he had a high aptitude and he was very reliable and everything, for a draftee or whatever. So he was one of the few selected to be in trench mortars. So they had to train at a different site in France. Val de Haan France is where they sent him for extensive training on artillery. So we'll go to the next slide. And that's a great picture there of the railroad station there at Val de Haan. So that's probably where he, after he got off the ship, and he probably took the train right over to Val de Haan. And this was in August of 1918. And of course, his other brother was in the 1st Infantry Division, and he was already in combat at that time. We'll go to the next slide. Now, he met these officers. Now, these are all the actually British artillery instructors in Val de Haan. And they, believe me, they knew exactly what they were doing because they were fighting over in France with the French since 1914. And they had all the artillery ranges and mortar ranges and everything, and they really, really had to get all the experience to be able to do these, do everything to go before they were, you know, General Pershing would let them go into action. And we'll go to the next slide. So they went through all this training. There's some great pictures there. There they are, having mealtime on the left, and there they are on the right. Getting haircuts and washing up and everything else. They had to be introduced to trench warfare. And then we'll go to the next slide. So at Val de Haan, artillery training, you can see this open field here. And back then, a lot of the artillery pieces, whatever, were pulled by horses. And you can see all the caissons there, all the everything set up ready for training, and it was quite an operation in France. And we'll go to the next slide. And here's some of the French artillery. You can see the size of this artillery piece. So this is where all the training was done, and all the instructors had to train all these new recruits. We'll go to the next slide. And here's a great picture. It had since been colorized. Now, what they would do is they would take them by regiment, and then they would send them to the front line, which is normally a quieter sector where they didn't expect any attack. And here's a picture in the front line, just so they can get acclimated to the climate and what's involved here. And they would stay there for 3 weeks at a clip and then go back to Val de Haan for more training. Go to the next slide. And there's actually a picture of the Frontline Trenches over in France. And they had to get assimilated. It's really, really tough. Now, the French had the idea that it was going to continue on to be a defensive war. They stay in their trenches, the Germans stay in their trenches, and they endure an onslaught from Germans, and Germans would endure an onslaught from the French as they would advance across no man's land. Well, General Pershing had different ideas. First of all, he wasn't going to use all the American troops and put them in as replacements in the French army or in the British army. That was not going to happen. But in order for them to be successful, they had to really train. And this training was very extensive. And to his credit, if you can imagine, the United States Army only had 200,000 soldiers in 1914, ranked 13 in the world in their army. And all of a sudden, they're going to end up with almost 1.5 million, almost 2 million soldiers in France. And General Pershing had to make sure they were all trained so they would all survive. And we'll go to the next slide. Here's another great shot there. You can see Frontline Trenches, 3 weeks training. And there were some artillery attacks and things like that. They had to get used to all of that. And then we'll go to the next slide. And this is also something they had to get used to. During spring and whatever, and during the rainy season, you can see that the trenches are all full of water, but you can't raise your head above anything. It'll get picked off by the German snipers. So they had to learn how to do all of this. And that's the trench mortar on the left here. That's their collar disc. See, it says TM with the cross cannons. So there's a very select few that were actually trained on that, because that's very important. Because you don't just drop a shell into a mortar and let it go. What you have to do is learn how to adjust fire. If it's too long, if it's too short, fire for effect, everything else. There's a lot of adjustments there, and you have to be the right person to do that, or if you have close artillery support during an attack, you're going to end up killing a lot of your own soldiers. Friendly fire is what they call it. We'll go to the next slide. And you can see what it was like there in the rainy season, all the mud. They put a lot of log sidewalks, if you will, there to go from trench to trench. They had to be acclimated into this type of an atmosphere. And we'll go to the next slide. Now, they're talking about communication trenches, and you're probably going to say, what in the world is that? What they have is a first line of defense, the real deep trenches that you saw with sandbags and everything, and then back quite a few, maybe a mile or so, they would have another line. So in case they were overrun, they could fall back to the second line of defense. But to go between them so they wouldn't be exposed, they would cut what they call these narrow communication trenches, and they would send messengers back and forth between everyone and that's what this is. This is called a communication trench. Go to the next slide. And there's the mortar, and you can see the shell he's trying to put in there, a large mortar. It was with the 301st Trench Mortar Battery. And at this time, he was still with the 76th Infantry Division. They didn't break them up yet. And we'll go to the next slide. And I found this picture. This is amazing. Here they are stacked up, all the mortar shells, ready to feed the mortars in Val de Haan, France. And of course, if you were going to supply all these shells, whatever, that's probably not the place you'd want to sit and take a break. You go to the next slide. And there's a couple other types of the mortars. If you take a close look, you've got that's all geared and whatever. You can see the gears on the side, and what they have is you can elevate and lower these mortars. Very effective. And you're right up front with the infantry. You're right in the same trench that they're in when you use these types of mortars. Go to the next slide. Now, we're going to move along to his brother, William Norton, and the 1st Infantry Division. And this was moving on to May of 1918. And the 1st Infantry Division was the only division that was actually trained and ready for combat, according to General Pershing. They were the first ones over in France, and they were ready to go. Now, since Pershing made the point that he did not want them to get used as replacements, they were going to fight together as an American force, what the French did and the British did was said, okay, here's your chance to prove it. And they did. Take a look on the map here. In the blue, I circled Paris. In the red is the trenches where the Germans were. You can see how they kept on inching towards Paris. And the whole idea was if they caught Paris, then they could have the French actually beat the French and have them, capitulate. So there was a small town called Cantigny, and I circled that in green. You can see the bulge in the line there just north of Paris, getting really close to Paris. So we'll go to the next slide. And I found out, what does this town actually look like? So I got a couple of these pictures here, what it looks like today. Just a very small village, if you will, May 1918 in France, nice and quiet. Or at least it is right now. And you go to the next slide. Now, what happened here is, of course, that's right on the front lines of the German trenches. The Germans reinforced this town. And the Americans didn't really know that at that time. And you can see the picture here of all the Germans just marching towards Cantigny. And this was going to be one heck of a fight. So we'll go to the next slide. And there's a picture on the right of Cantigny today. Very hilly, mountainous, if you will, a lot of forest on the ridge up there. But that's the town they wanted to take. Now, General Pershing, it was kind of interesting because he told the soldiers, basically, I'm paraphrasing this comment. He had quite a long speech. The world is waiting to see if the American army can fight on its own. That's both the Germans, the French, and the British. They didn't realize if they could do that or not. And he said, the 1st Infantry Division will capture Cantigny. And secondly, no inch of Cantigny will be surrendered. See, there's one thing to capture a town with a small force, another thing to defend it against a counterattack. So we'll go to the next slide. So they got their orders, and now they were waiting for, they had support here. The French tanks, 12 or 13 of them, there they are there, and waiting for the French tanks to come up. It's going to be an American attack. They had 4,000, he selected 4,000 out of the big red one to attack this town. They're all waiting, you can see them there waiting for the signal to attack when they get everything up. And this is really, really quite a battle. We'll go to the next slide. Now to open it up like they do with every battle, the 1st Infantry Division, they have a 2-hour bombardment. So they absolutely just threw everything they had at this town. And you can see in the open plain there, you can see all the 1st Infantry tank, artillery. We'll go to the next slide. And this is a great painting here, and it shows the actual opening bombardment of Cantigny. And you can see they had to use French cannons because there were no American cannons over there, but it was all American, they were all trained. And they just let go with all the, everything they could to try to, before they attacked. We'll go to the next slide. And they really demolished the town. Here's a picture. Not too many pictures of this town exist today, but you can see that a lot of the buildings were just ripped to shreds. But the Germans survived. We'll go to the next picture. And now this is actually taken at Cantigny. And you can see there's the probably a squad leader. Attack at my command. In other words, they all got at the same time, synchronized their watches. You can see the French tank in the back here, and they went over the top to attack, right down to attack the town. Between around May 20th through 28th, 1918. We'll go to the next slide. And this is an actual picture too. This is amazing. If you look right on that horizon there where the sky meets the ground, you can see all the where the artillery is firing away and firing away. You can see the smoke there coming up there. They sent off a lot of shells over there to shake up the Germans. And there's their American trench, 1st Infantry Division, where Bill Norton was. And up he went over the trench. We'll go to the next slide. And you can see this is another, I don't have any actual photographs of the attack, but this was another drawing which pretty much says it all. You can see all the buildings were demolished by artillery. You can see the 4,000 troops with Private Bill Norton who's probably in there with them, all fighting off the Germans that were still there in the town. It was quite a coordinated effort. You can see the French had some air support. You can see the double-wing fighter planes going over the town. And they also French supplied tanks. And what's important about this is on record in history as the first battle that the Americans fought in France. Very important. Not only that, it was the first battle that any army advanced on anything. Everything the French were, they were all in trenches and dug trenches and just stayed there. And here they're going to take some territory. That's kind of new to the whole operation here on the Western Front. And the other first is General Pershing coordinated the whole thing. The U.S. Army never had anything like that. First of all, they never coordinated the Air Force. They never coordinated the tanks. They never coordinated the infantry. And it it was amazing what happened there. And they actually took the town in 30 to 45 minutes. And we'll go to the next slide. And there's a picture there. There's the, on the left, there's the town of Cantigny. You can see the church there with its steeple. You can see one of the smaller French tanks there on the main street here. And it was amazing because it was the first combat assault of the entire campaign. And there's two different philosophies. The American philosophy under the American Expeditionary Force of General Pershing is, we're not going to sit around in trenches and get pounded by artillery and get cut down when we advance by machine gun fire. What we're going to do is we're going to pick out sectors, send in regiments, and we're going to get out of those trenches and take them, move forward. He was very aggressive, but he needed everyone to be completely trained in order to do this. Just an amazing job. The United States Army never did anything like this before, and I don't think the world's ever done anything like this before. Cantigny, France. It's a place that's forgotten, but certainly not by the 1st Infantry Division. Very, very proud of what they did here. Now, the second part of this attack is they've got to hold the town, because like any attack, there's always a counterattack. So if you go back to that picture there, you can see on the right, they went outside the town, probably a half mile, dug their own trenches, and had to organize all the troops there, 4,000, organize everything because they expected a German counterattack. And there they are on the right. That's an actual picture. There's a trench outside of Cantigny, France. And we'll go to the next slide. And now this is important here. Here's William Norton. And he had a high aptitude, and that's why that when he was in the 1st Infantry Division, he was an expert in machine gun. He was in the machine gun battalion, which was attached on this first fight to the regiment that went over there. And this is a picture here. So here they are. They feel excited because they attacked successfully and captured the town of Cantigny. But the biggest problem is, and General Pershing was smart to know, is I will not give an inch. We're not give an inch of that town. We're going to show the world, and the whole world was watching. This was in all the papers and everything, what the Americans can do. Because the Germans felt that the Americans were not up to it. They were soft, if you will, not used to all this, because both the Germans, the French, and the British have been in combat and warfare since 1914, for 4 years. Amazing. And the Americans were determined to show that they can do it. And the whole idea was, if they can, then there will be a main force here. They could hold their own sectors of the lines against the German lines. So here they are, you can see on the right. And William Norton is probably right there in that picture somewhere, we'll never know. And setting up all the machine guns all the way down the line. So we'll go to the next slide. And some of these pictures are quite revealing. So certainly the town was taken. However, here comes the German counterattack. You can see all the Germans across the open field coming up the hill towards the town of Cantigny. And can you imagine, you're sitting there in the trenches, and the general said the world is watching you. You will not give an inch in that town. And here comes the German attack. Well, for 3 days, they had one counterattack after another. 3 days. And they ended up with 7 different tries to take Cantigny. And the German army was beaten back every single time. Just amazing point of history that I don't think anybody even knows or even recognizes to this day what this was. So we'll go to the next slide. And there's a picture here. It's you can almost see the commander standing up there. They're in the trench. If you look on the horizon, you can see the Germans coming up, coming over the top, and you can just imagine the commander there saying, "Here they come." And you can see there, here we go. And you can see the artillery, German artillery hitting them. They were going to show the Americans what they can do, and they're going to just push them right back. It's just an amazing point in history. We'll go to the next slide. And after 7 tries for 3 days, the Germans pulled back. May 28th, 1918. And there's a picture there. The town was taken. There's a church. You can see the church with a steeple all full of cannon shot holes all over it and everything else. And they finally took it. And it went down in history as the first American offensive attack in World War I. And the German casualties were 1,400, and the American were 1,600. But they did it. And of course, by standards in the Western Front, this was a small amount of casualties, but it was only, it's a first step. And it was extremely important. So we'll go to the next slide. Now they got a monument right there in Cantigny, and you can see they rebuilt the church over there on the right. To this day, you can visit that. And I took a neat picture, I think, of the final slide. And go to the next slide. And I wanted to say that on the right, there's the church. You can see it's all been hit. And there's the same church reconstructed today in Cantigny. And they're very proud, and they just, to this day, can't thank the Americans enough. So this is episode 3 of World War I with my great uncles, and I hope you enjoyed it. Have a good evening.